Okay, and we are all done, or at least I'm done with all that crap. And here I am, and here you is. Good evening, gentleys and ladymen. Lovely to see you all. My name is Tad Williams. I am this guy. I am sitting at my desk in my office in California, not tremendously far from the Pacific Ocean. And I am going to read to you. I will say hello first to the folks who are checking in. Hello, Ilva, darling. Holger, excuse me, that was not a call. Having to do with you, Holger. The election's coming closer and closer. How do you see the situation for your country at the moment? I'm trying to, as much as possible, stay away from the hideousness of current politics. Not happy. You might see some of my thoughts if you check in on my Facebook page. I am not happy at all with the current condition of the commonweal, but I'll talk about that when I'm not reading. Eventually, I'll probably wind up just talking all the time on these shows, and then you will all get more than you want of my political commentary. But for now, I'm going to try and concentrate on just keeping people company in the pandemic. But I'm not happy, Holder. I'll put it that way. And anybody who wants to find out more, just go see some of my social media comments, and you'll get a general impression of where I'm at. Anyway, hello, Jeremy. Yes, those are my mystic hand waves that I was doing while I was doing about other things. Good morning, Petra. Good to see you. Jessica, good to see you. Ronnie, hello. Chris, Carol, and Hertie, and Mahmoud, and MJ, and Sherry, and David. Hello, everybody who showed up so far. Anyway, good to see you. It's now a few minutes after 2 o'clock in the morning, my time here in semi-sunny California. It's been a long and busy weekend in terms of working and staying alive. Ooh, 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 staying alive. Little theme song for the pandemic there. And just dealing with the horror that is everyday news in the United States. So we're what can I say? I'm hoping that all of a sudden there will be just a moment of revelation when everybody will wake up and say things like, gee, maybe we should do something about the growing global climate heating thing. Yeah, maybe it's time to actually do something about that now that like half the world is on fire. And, it'd be nice to get rid of this pandemic thing too. So maybe while we're trying to make a vaccine, which a bunch of idiots won't take anyway because they're idiots, we are, maybe we could wear masks when we go out and not spread the diseases around and not kill off all the most vulnerable members of our society, whether they're old or ill or poor and therefore, badly nourished and badly health cared, especially in our country. But hope springs eternal. Certainly in the Williams breast it does. I see you're wondering why there's a guitar handle sticking up on my t-shirt. It's a Beatles shirt. I was having a nostalgic fit tonight and watching some old videos of various kinds. Not just the Beatles, but like a whole bunch of stuff that I grew up with, Queen and The Who and Todd Rundgren and David Bowie and, just stuff like that. But I was watching actually old live videos, which is, always fun. I was at some of those shows and I was at shows similar to some of them. So, it's always true. It's everybody thinks like the music of their generation is the greatest. And I don't think that. I'm not an idiot. I'm a historian. And I know that everybody has a special glowy feeling about the songs that were significant to society and to them when they were, in between the years of like 13 and 25 or so, maybe younger for some people, I don't know. Which is not to say that anybody stops liking music or anything else, but it means that the intensity that you feel leads some people to believe, well, since it's not exactly like that stuff that I already know that I love, which of course is also stuff that will never happen again because it was tied into the time you heard it, people are also like, so, nothing today is anywhere near as good. And that's crap. That's just crap. Whatever art form you're talking about, if you actually think that just because you're not enjoying stuff as much as, the young folk or whoever are, that somehow that's a reflection on the quality of what's being done. When in reality, the world is full of creative people and there's creative stuff being done all the time. Wonderful new books being written. Wonderful new records being made, wonderful new symphonies being composed, wonderful new paintings, sculptures, video art, performance art, whatever. So that's okay. You don't have to love everything, and you don't have to love stuff that's different than what you grew up with. That's personal to you. That's who you are, and that's part of you. That's all. Just don't make the mistake of falling into the trap that if it's not in your own personal wheelhouse, that somehow there's something wrong with it. That's a sad way to get old and grumpy and also to be wrong. Period. Anyway, so I say that coming off a bit of a nostalgia Jones tonight where I was watching all the stuff that I grew up with and that was crucial and important to me and still is because it made me or helped me. Well, I can't really blame them, but it contributed to who I am today, whatever the hell that is. Anyway, so just a quick update. We are all still doing the same thing we've been doing here. Nobody's sick or sicker or anything yet. No new cases around us. We still are, lying close to the ground, of course, obviously. Or pick your metaphor, we're hunkering down, we're laying up in the weeds, we're whatever you want to call it, trying not to get it. As mentioned before, in large part because we have people in our household who are particularly susceptible. Fortunately, I was going to say, fortunately for me, I'm not one of them. But of course I am, because I'm like old AF now. So, I guess I am in the danger zone myself. I don't feel that way. I feel very perky and full of health. So anyway, so while you're thinking about how things are on your end, and beaming me little thoughts to let me know what's going on your end, since I can't talk to each one of you individually. I will go ahead with the reading, I guess. And we are reading from one of my more recent works, The Heart of What Was Lost. By the way, for those of you into obscure Tad, or in this case, Tad and Deb books, because I'm in between all these different books because of the publishing jam up, I've gone from Brothers of the Wind, because I'm still waiting for feedback on that short novel, again, an Ostenard novel. Navigator's Children, the big novel, because I'm ready to plunge back into it, but it's going to be a long stretch, so I'm not quite willing to start that yet. Instead, I'm working on the third Ordinary Farm book, which is only like 15 years overdue at this point. All the lovely young people who wrote us letters about the first two are probably all grandparents by now. But it's very much, Deborah's already written the first draft. I'm in the process of writing the second draft. I just reread the second book to make sure I could remember. I'm doing a lot of this in the last few years to make sure I could remember what was happening, so I don't do the same thing I did with the Ostenard books where I keep saying, hey, I'm going to use so-and-so in the next book. And my more informed advisors tell me, you killed him, Tad, you can't use him, you killed him. So I actually went back and read the book because it's a nice short book comparatively. It's only a mere 300 pages or something. Anyway, enough bibble babble. I am reading from The Heart of What Was Lost. And as I explained to you earlier, since we're now in that part of the book where we're first introduced to the MacGuffin, which is the actual heart of what was lost, we are, not that it's on this cover, because this is a sword. It's actually a knife. It's somebody's knife, I think. Yeah, it's a knife. Now I remember. But anyway, but the heart of what was lost, which was originally called the heart of regret, is a thing, which is being talked about in the book right now. For those of you who are just catching up with the reading of this story or whatever, I'm reading it 2 nights on a weekend, or one night, one morning. And as I'm going through it, the main thing you need to know, it takes place at the right after To Green Angel Tower, the first Ostenard trilogy. Right after the end of that, at the end of that war, the Rimmersmen, the northern Rimmersmen, and a bunch of mercenaries led by Dukas Grimner are chasing the Norns back across the north. And the Norns, God, I had a Gumby moment, meaning the Monty Python Gumby, not the Art Cloaky Gumby. I had a Gumby moment there. The Rimmersmen are chasing the Norns across the north, and as the Norns are retreating, we are following one storyline among them, which is the storyline of Vieki, who is a member of the Order of Builders, the engineers, basically, who is fleeing with a lot of engineers and a small number of sacrifices who are warriors, back towards Nakiga, the home of the Norns. They are being pursued by, as mentioned, as Grimner and his plot line, and also there are 2 of the mercenaries, or not so much mercenaries, but people who were on their way to another soldiering job and got hooked up into this company, are Porto and Endry, who are essentially townsmen from back in Perduran, but now they're in the far north in this military operation. And then the only other part that you need to know is that every now and then you hear somebody talking about this from the Norn point of view as a historical thing. And that is a chronicler, a Norn or Hikedaya chronicler named Lady Miga Saitjanata. And so she pops in every now and then. So with all of that, you should probably be able to figure it out. At this point, Vieki and his master, Yarike, along with the rest of the Norns, are trapped in an old crumbling Norn fortress that they had deserted long ago, but now as they're trying to get back to their old lands, they've reached it, and they have taken shelter there because they're being pursued by the mortals, the Rimmersmen under Isgrimner, etc. So that's where we is in the story. And so, meanwhile, Yariki, the highest-ranking Norn officer, has taken his protege Vieki aside to show him something. And it turns out to be this jewel, the heart of what was lost. And Yariki is looking at it, says, Vieki's looking at it, says, "It is beautiful, master. Someone has carved the interior." Inside the hemispheric gem, some careful hand had delineated a city of tall, graceful towers standing upon the cliffs above a great ocean. With Yarike's lamp behind it, the whole artful scene was colored by the gem itself, so the miniature city seemed to bask under bright vermilion skies. Who made such a wonderful thing? Yaramon, my ancestor himself. The carving depicts Great Zo, our beloved city on the shores of the dreaming sea, lost with all the rest to unbeing when the garden fell. Like your own father, Viekitsa, my great-grandfather was an artist, and the voyage from the garden to these lands was a long one. But now it serves as a reminder of all that the people left behind, all that makes us who we are. He nodded gravely, as if in answer to some question, but Vieki had not asked one. I will take it back now, before one of the others notices my light and comes to intrude on us. Yariki accepted the heavy pendant and hung the chain around his neck again, sliding the necklace down into his tunic until it was invisible. I am honored that you showed it to me, master. I do nothing without reason, host foreman. I showed this to you because I want you to make me a promise about it, but also because I want to make a promise to you. Yarike shook out his robes until they hung correctly again. Even in such terrible circumstances, the magister was correctly dressed at all times. Despite months of hardship and bloody battle, he looked as composed as if he stood in his own house. If I should fall here or somewhere else before we reach Nakiga. Host Foreman Vieki, I wish you to take the heart of what was lost and carry it back to my family. It will belong to one of my children or grandchildren if they return from our defeat in the south. May the Queen's eye watch over them. It is Clan Kijada's most precious heirloom. Will you accept this charge? With pride and gratitude, Master. Your trust is an honor to my whole family. Do not let it go too much to your head, said Yarike, amused. If the heart becomes your responsibility, that will be because I am dead. Vieki's face almost went slack with dismay, but he managed to conceal it. I spoke without thinking, Master. I beg your forgiveness. Yarike showed him a thin smile. Granted. And now my promise to you. I have watched you a long time, Vieki and Duya. Over the years, I have been impressed by your skills with tools and plans, but even more with the way you think for yourself, which it grieves me to say is rare among our people in these fallen days. Thus, it is my wish that one day you will follow me as High Magister of the Order of Builders, and I have written a letter to the Queen's celebrants to say so. That letter is among my effects. If I do not survive this adventure of ours, when you take the heart, take that letter and others you will find in my possession as well, and carry them all to Nakika. Vieki stood as if thunderstruck, unable for a moment to find his voice. Truly, Magister? You wish me to be your successor? The Magister showed a hint of a mocking frown. If I did not, this would be an oddly complicated and impractical jest, Host Foreman. Vieki dropped to his knees. I will struggle all my life to live up to the honors you have heaped on me. And may that life be a long and useful one, Vieki-tsa. But before Yarike could say more, hoarse shouts echoed from somewhere nearby, clearly the triumphant cries of Northmen. The crowd of builders in the ruined hall murmured uneasily and pressed closer together, facing the doorway, weapons raised. Well, it seems that the time to make dispensations for the future is over. Yarike took Vieki's elbow and for a moment seemed to need the support. Let us stand with the others and be ready to fight. The present is all we have, or whatever remains of it. Isgrimner had done his best in just a few days to instill some kind of wider discipline into Earl Vigry's men. Unlike the soldiers Isgrimner had brought back from the south, they still liked to fight in the chaotic northern style, attacking and falling back individually or in small groups as the mood struck them. Even with a huge advantage of numbers, this kind of brawling was a bad idea against an enemy as crafty and patient as the Norns, and the Duke had set Sludig and several other trusted lieutenants to work trying to teach the rudiments of the more ordered fighting style of the Erkenguard. But within moments of the attack beginning, it was clear that the lessons had not really taken. Eager for glory, young Floki and a dozen of his father's bondsmen did not stop at the first set of broken walls to wait for the rest of their comrades, but hammered through the first Norn defenses and rushed uphill toward the round tower where the Norn commanders were presumed to be. Immediately afterward, a shower of arrows sealed the way behind them. It was impossible to know whether Floki and his followers still survived or had been cut down. Isgrimner could only be grateful that Brinder was on the far side of the field and had not seen what had happened to his son. He would have taken his best men and charged after Floki, compounding the mistake. So this is what it comes to. I do not tell Brinder what has happened to his son for fear of something worse happening. You, sire, you saved me. Command is more often a curse than a blessing. Isgrimner certainly understood Floki and the rest. Just the sight of the enemy's rigid, corpse-pale faces was enough to raise a red mist of hate before his own eyes. But he could not concern himself with the fate of one mere man, or even a dozen, not when the fate of thousands hung on his decisions. No matter, he told himself, and waved another line of men up the hill. There will be time for regrets later. There's always time for regret. As the day went on, the sun should have burned through the fog, or at least so it seemed to Porto on the slopes below the ruins. Instead, the mists grew thicker, swirling on the cold breeze until it was almost impossible to see the valley walls or even the old castle. He and Endry hung back to defend the catapult gunners from counterattack. Black arrows whistled down from the hillside, and occasionally, when the mists cleared for a moment, Norns could be seen, peering from the shadows like the unburied dead. But the white foxes never left the cover of their ancient walls. The catapult men kept busy, flinging stone after stone at the great tower near the top of the hill, but although they struck it time and again, they could not bring it down. As the day lengthened, mists began to swallow up the scarce afternoon light entirely, so that it seemed that night would arrive long before sunset. Determined to break the resistance before dark fell, Dukas Grimner and his captains led a troop carrying siege ladders in an attack on the central tower, the last whole piece of the age-old castle. Now the Norns finally came out, and although Porto and Endry were not part of the struggle, it was clear that the fighting was terrible and bloody. Then, in the middle of the assault, a great braying sound came echoing down from the ridgetop above the castle. Recognizing the horns that had blown at the commencement of battle in the morning, Porto thought a second force of Rimmersmen had made their way up into the valley heights, and now meant to attack the castle from above, and his heart filled with hope. But the blare of horns came instead from a party of scouts hurrying back from farther down the valley. The Northmen, up on the ridge, were shouting and waving their arms, and in only a few moments Porto went from cheering to mouth-gaping silence as he listened to the growing thunder of something rushing toward them along the valley floor. The mists began to boil. Then a host of armored riders appeared out of the tatters of gray fog at the bottom of the pass, thundering up the valley toward them. The newcomers were all in white or black, riding horses and even stranger creatures. "Good God!" Endry cried. "What are they?" "More Norns." Porto had been worried already, fearful of the battle and of this strange place, but now he felt his insides turning to ice. The oncoming Norn troop seemed big enough to roll through the entire valley like a flood tide, sweeping them all to death, or worse. Porto pushed past the fleeing catapult engineers to grab Endry and drag him away from the great machine. All around the base of the hill, Rimmersmen broke their lines and scattered, many scrambling upslope to join with their fellows who had surrounded the tower. But the Norn riders were among them in mere moments, stabbing and slashing with weird angular blades. Some of them rode goats, tall as horses, unnatural creatures with eyes yellow as sulfur. But the rider who caught Porto's attention was the leader, a horned figure with a terrible, inhuman face. The apparition wore white plate armor and rode a huge white horse. At his first panicked glance, as the newcomer dealt death with a long silver-gray sword to any mortal unlucky enough to be caught within its reach, Porto thought the horned figure some kind of demon summoned by the fairies, a creature straight from hell. But as he dragged Endry out of the path of the oncoming troop, and the leader galloped by, he realized that the demonic face was only a helmet in the shape of an owl's head. It was all Porto could do to fend off the blows smashing down on him from above, but he held his shield up and managed to keep Endry behind him as he backed out of the path of charging Norns. He took a hard swipe to his helmet, and although it almost knocked him down, he stayed on his feet. A moment later, the greater part of the Norn troop had ridden past him and up the hill into the ruins. A quick look showed him that Endry seemed to be unhurt. To Porto's astonishment, the Norn reinforcements barely engaged with Isgrimnir's besieging force at all, but crashed through, killing a few of them and losing a handful of their own. Then they continued upslope, where they met reserves from inside the tower, who helped to protect the entrance until the Norn riders could get inside. After what seemed only a few dozen racing heartbeats, after Porto had first seen them appear from the mists, the new troop of Norn soldiers had disappeared into the tower. The hilltop was strewn with bodies, but most of the Rimmersmen who had fought were still standing, faces sagging with surprise as the Norns forced the gates closed behind them, sealing the tower once more. The general lifted off her helmet. Her braided white hair had come undone in the charge and hung across her face until she swept it aside. She had the long chin and narrow nose of the oldest Hikedaya families, and an expression as stern as some ancient tomb effigy. "Who is the master here?" "That would be me, General Sunoku. Yariki Se Kijada, High Magister of the Builders." Vieki's master made a carefully calibrated gesture of welcome. "You have arrived, hoped for, but unlooked for. We had thought ourselves beyond the reach of any reinforcements. Our echoes received no reply to their calls." "It could not be helped," she said, offering the scantest of ritual salutes in return. "The mortals have one of the Zidaya with them, and she carries a witness. We could not risk breaking silence." Vieki stared at this savior that had arrived seemingly from nowhere, like a hero out of the oldest tales of the garden. He knew of General Sunoku, of course. Most Hikedaya did. She might be no higher in the order of sacrifice than Vieki was among the builders, a subordinate of the ordinal leader. But because of her family blood, she moved in much higher circles than Vieki could ever dream of joining. As he watched her, fascinated, Sunoku turned to one of her lieutenants. "See to the wounded. Make them well enough that they can ride." "What about those who are too badly injured?" the sacrifice asked. She only stared at him, her expression flat as a frozen pond, then turned back to Yarike. "How many are you here?" "Perhaps 200 left. More than half of them builders," the High Magister said. "We also have the celebrants you see with the general's body, half a dozen singers under Tsayin Ka, and a few echoes. The rest are sacrifices, and now fall under your command." "But you stand over us all, High Magister," the general said. "I would not flout the Queen's sacred ranks." Which was only barely true, Vieki knew. Sunoku was of the Iora, the Owl clan, in the male line of the legendary Ekimeniso himself, Queen Utuku's long-dead husband. The Iora were all but co-equal with the Queen's own Hamaka clan, and both of them were as far above even Yarike's noble family as the uppermost peak of the great mountain stood above the squares and public markets of the Nakiga floor. Among the noblest clans, family blood always outweighed the hierarchy of the orders, even the most powerful orders like the sacrifice and song. Vieki's thoughts and Sunoku's quiet conversation with Yarike were both interrupted by the arrival of League Commander Hayano and a troop of his warriors leading 3 mortal prisoners, all with their arms bound behind them. The largest of the captives, a young, muscular, yellow-bearded Northman, was bellowing in his crude tongue. Like most builders, Vieki did not speak a word of any mortal language, and he thought the hairy one sounded more like a bear than any thinking creature. Sunoku's lips twisted a little at one edge. "How I hate the sound of their barbaric yapping. Magister Yarike, may I kill them all so we can have some quiet?" Yarike shook his head. "No, General, not yet. Hayano brought them at my request. Will you question them about their numbers? I do not have the skill to do it myself." Vieki could not help wondering at this, since his scholarly master spoke the mortal's common tongue better than almost anyone in Nakiga. He assumed Yaarike was testing the sacrifice general in some way. Sunoku repeated Yaarike's question in the mortal's own speech, then shared the answers. He says that he is Floki, son of the great Thane, Brinder Goldenhair, she explained. He says that if some of his men had not turned coward and fled, he would already have taken all our heads by now, and the fighting would be over. But the prisoner would not tell them anything else, not the numbers of the Northmen waiting outside, nor any other useful information. When she had tried several times and could get nothing further from the red-faced mortal, or his brutish companions, the general unsheathed her sword, a slender span of silvery witchwood that seemed almost too long for her. The mortals could not look away from it, their eyes so wide the white showed all around. I suggest it is time to use more direct methods, Magister, Sunoku said. I scarcely blooded cold root today, and it still yearns to drink mortal ichor. She then produced her poniard, long and wickedly sharp, and held both blades before the Northmen. Or, if my lord Yaarike wants the conversation to pass more slowly, I can use cold leaf, which will remove smaller pieces. She leaned close until she was only a hand's breadth from the prisoners' faces. Either way, I will make the enjoyment last as long as I can. The mortal who called himself Floki began bellowing again, but this time there was a tone of terror in his voice that had not been there before. Your famous weapons will not teach them what they do not know, General, said Yaarike in a tone of regret. I fear we have learned all we can from these. Sunoku kicked out, knocking the one called Floki to the stone floor. Vieki heard what sounded like the mortal's shin breaking. The bearded soldier clutched his leg, rolling back and forth, gasping in pain. Whether they had told us more or not, Sunoku said, sheathing her weapons once more, it would not have changed the nature of our problem. You have 200 here, Magister. I have scarcely twice those numbers myself. I mustered every last available and able sacrifice in Nakiga, and could find and mount less than 400 to bring with me. But it matters not. What we must do now is prepare to escape. Escape? Yaarike was clearly surprised, something Vieki had seldom seen. How? The tunnels below us lead nowhere. She shook her head. Tunnels? No. We shall ride from here, smash our way free if we have to. I did not come so far and so fast to die here in an obscure border fort. I have a more important task. Yaarike nodded. You came for Marshal Ekisuno's body, of course. Your foreparent, your ancestor. Sunoku showed him a harsh smile. No, High Magister. I came for you and your builders, because without you, Nakiga will be overthrown by the mortals. Your clan, my clan, they will all be slaughtered in dark holes, like rabbits. Unsure of what was happening, the yellow-bearded mortal began to shout again, bellowing threats. Sunoku gave a sign, and one of her sacrifices drew his sword and struck the prisoner hard on the head with the pommel. He did not make another sound, but lay on the floor, twitching and drizzling blood from his scalp. I will kill that one myself in a moment, and enjoy it like a good meal, Sunoku said. But our time is short, so first we must make our plans. As the general conferred with Magister Yaarike and the plainly overwhelmed Hayano, who could only gaze at Sunoku in awe, Vieki watched with an interest that almost made him forget their terrible situation. He had never seen Sunoku before, but of course he knew of her. The general was famous for her bravery, and although a few other female officers held equally high rank in the order of sacrifice, none of those commanded either the loyalty or the fascination that the ordinary sacrifices felt for Sunoku. The general had weirdly light eyes, so pale and gray shot that they seemed like twilight skies compared to the purplish midnight of most Hikkadaya. She was tall for her sex, but not unusually so. Both Yarike and Hayano were taller, and her movements were swift and almost impossibly graceful. She was like a bright flame, Vieki thought, drawing the eye each time she moved. But only a few of the mortals were destroyed during your arrival, Hayano said. They vastly outnumber us still. Surely we should wait and let them wear themselves down. They are far from home, and their supply lines are vulnerable. And what if there are more of them coming, Commander? Asked Sunoku. Hayano blinked. He might as well have flinched. While we are pinned here in the wreckage of Tangleroot Castle, the outer walls of Nakiga are in ruins, and the mountain gate in the city walls at Three Ravens is all but undefended. Did you not see that great ram of black iron the mortals have brought? Where do you think that is to be used? Not on these old decrepit stones. That is for knocking on the very door of our home. They will be breaking into the Queen's own chamber before the summer months have ended. May the garden preserve her always. She shook her head. No, we must break out of this ring now and make our way north as quickly as we can. High Magister Yarike, do you agree? He looked at her for a moment. Yes, if it must be so, then let it be sooner rather than later. Good. Sunoku put her helmet down on the broken stone pillar, rounded by centuries of rain. Then call all the chieftains and their troops here, leaving only sentries. If a chieftain has died during today's fighting, Commander Hayano, appoint one who will do what he or she is told. Do you understand? But what of your ancestor's body and its coffin? Asked Yarike. He pointed to the massive wagon where the chanting celebrants still knelt. How will we manage to carry that away while still putting distance between ourselves and the mortals? We won't, said General Sunoku flatly. Leave it behind. Yarike was clearly astonished. You will desert your great-great-grandfather's body? She shook her head. No, that weighs but little. It can be carried on the back of someone's saddle, and I will offer prayers of regret and penitence to my foreparent for the dishonor. But the sarcophagus itself, that is useless. We will not be weighed down by it. Break it to pieces to keep it from the grubby paws of the mortals. Vieki was watching the yellow-bearded mortal, still writhing in pain between the other two staring prisoners. The murderous invaders showed no bravado now, Vieki thought. Beneath their hairy pelts, these Northmen seemed to hide the hearts of terrified children. A thought came to him then, but he waited until both Yarike and Sunoku had paused before lifting his head in submissive request. If my master and the general will permit me. Yarike turned to look at him. Yes, host foreman Vieki? Did I hear you say that host singer Tsayin Ka survived the battle? Yes, said his master. I have seen her. What of it? If I do not offend by putting myself forward, Vieki said, I may have an idea. The campfires of the Duke's army had been kept small, especially those closest to the ruins. Porto and Endry had been left to guard the catapult, which loomed above them in the flickering light like a watchful dragon. But where did all those white foxes come from? Endry asked for perhaps the dozenth time. Porto had given up trying to answer him. He poked the fire and then pushed his hands as close as he could without burning them. Are they ghosts? How could they get so close without our scouts hearing them? Oh, sweet Adon, they are Norns, not ghosts. Porto felt as though something inside him wanted to escape. But if it did, it might tear the world to pieces with its teeth. This hellish place was driving him into madness. Fairies can be killed. Did you not see the bodies lying in the snow? Did you not see the blood? Red, the same as ours. And when it runs out of them, they die. You heard that soldier. He put 3 arrows in one not an hour ago, but the creature took no hurt from it. Just vanished away. If that is not a ghost, what is it? God's blood, man, will you stop this? They are tricky, the Norns. Everybody who is at the hayhole knows that. They make shadows and cast their voices, but shadows cannot hurt us. But still, Endry was almost breathless and could not let it go. Where did they all? The fire before them suddenly blazed up as if a strong wind had fanned the coals. But instead of the flames bending, they grew upward until they danced higher than men's heads. All around, the other campfires were also erupting into wavering pillars of flame. Startled Northmen scrambled on their hands and knees. Porto, who had tumbled backward at the first fiery billow, sat sprawled on the freezing ground while Endry stared in bulge-eyed terror. Some of the soldiers were so frightened that they cried out for God or their mothers or let out simple, incoherent cries of terror. And then a face appeared in the flames in front of Porto, and not just in his campfire, but in every single one throughout the sprawling camp. This fiery mask rippled and billowed like something seen in deep water. The face was female, but also not entirely real. Where the eyes should be, and in the open mouth, nothing showed but flames. "It's the Queen!" someone shouted in fright. "The Queen of the White Foxes! She has come back!" Men scrambled away from the fires and began to run in all directions, like animals. "Mortals!" The voice rolled out from every fire, from every circle of men, as chill as the ice that had crystallized on the tent ropes. "You will die in these lands! We will take back what is ours!" Porto could not tell if the dreadful voice was in the air all around or came somehow from inside his own skull. He saw Endry stumble to his feet and managed to grab at the younger man's leg as he lurched past, bringing him down heavily into the snowy mud. Porto had no idea what was happening, but he knew if he let go, Endry would run like a maddened beast into the freezing night, never to return. Endry fought back like a terrified child, but Porto hung on, even as the apparition in the fire melted and the flames fell back to what they had been. A moment later, the fires sputtered and went out entirely, plunging the camp into darkness. With that horrible voice still ringing in his thoughts, Porto did not understand at first what else he was hearing. But then he heard men shouting in pain and surprise. Brief cries, swiftly ended, and felt rather than saw a flock of swiftly moving shadows sweeping down toward the camp from the ruins atop the hill. Men were suddenly dying all around him at the hands of near invisible enemies, but Porto could not get free of struggling Endry to unsheath his blade. "They are here!" he hissed into his friend's ear. "The Norns are here, trying to kill us all! Damn you, man, get up and fight!" Endry suddenly stopped struggling, and for an instant Porto thought one of the invisible attackers had stabbed and killed the youth right in Porto's arms. Then a glare of red from the top of the hill revealed Endry's face staring up toward the ruins, mouth stretched in a gape of tortured disbelief. Porto turned to find where this new light came from, and saw a great blaze at the edge of the ruins, a pillar of flame higher even than the bespelled campfires, almost to the height of the surrounding trees. Now the burning object began to roll down the hill toward the camp, slowly at first, bucking and jouncing over the stony slope, but picking up speed with every one of Porto's racing heartbeats. Its wheels were as tall as a man. "It's a wagon," was his first confused thought. Some kind of giant war wagon. And that was true enough, but there was also something more. Atop the wain's vast bed lay a sarcophagus, a huge thing, but its lid was partway off and the insides were aflame, so that a tail of fire streamed behind it, marking its hastening career down the hill. And even as Porthos stared in astonishment, a screaming figure lurched up out of the monstrous, burning box, knocking the lid aside. The writhing figure wore a mask and was itself aflame. Burning bandages turned the thing in the casket into a wildly gyrating torch that flailed the air and shrieked, the most inhuman noise Porto had ever heard, an unending, whistling scream without words. Many men who had held their ground during the first onslaught of shadow warriors from the ruins now turned and ran stumbling downhill from the blazing, howling corpse atop its battle wagon. The besiegers made no pretense of resistance, but fled the apparition as though one thought controlled them all, raw southern recruits and battle-hard rimmersmen alike. Many were struck down by arrows Porto could not see, or surrounded in the darkness by deeper shadows, after which they lay silent in the snow with throats slit or guts spilled. Something crashed against Porto's face, stunning him. It was Endry, who had lashed out in his desperation to escape and was now half crawling, half staggering down the slope away from the ruins, mad with fear. Porto did not know what to do. The camp was overrun with shadows, and already dozens of his comrades were dead, the rest scattered. He could hear some of them lost in the trees, shouting for God to save them. It had all happened so fast, as if a great wind had blown their army to pieces in an instant. He crawled to his feet and ran after Endry. He could do nothing else. He had no one else to save. Her song completed, the host singer, Sayin Ka, fell to the uneven floor stones in the central hall of the ruined forest, where she lay gasping like a landed fish, her starvation-shrunken limbs twitching. Vieki moved to help her. "No! Do not touch her!" Yaurike cried. "The fire spirit still flows in her. Look!" As Vieki watched, several more of the red-robed Order of Song moved toward Sayin Ka, as cautiously as if she were a sleeping dragon. One put a stick beneath her and rolled her over. Vieki recoiled. The singer's face and hands, the only parts of her flesh he could see, smoldered with light beneath the skin, as though she herself had no more substance than a wax candle. "Will she live?" Vieki asked his master quietly. "She is the best of her order that we have." "And she was the only one who could have made the fire speak," said Yaurike, shaking his head. "That was a magister's trick, but she managed it. I am impressed that she still lives, although that may not be true for long. Still, even if she recovers, she will be useless to us until she can be healed from this effort back in Nakiga." He turned to the singers, now lifting Sayin Ka's body and wrapping it in a heavy blanket. Vieki could feel the heat still coming off her at several paces distance. "Go now, all of you," Yaurike told them. "Get her away while the mortals are still in confusion. Thanks to Sayin Ka's efforts, General Sunoku has carved us an escape route, but it will close very quickly." As the singers hurried out, carrying the steaming body of their leader like a holy relic, Yaurike nodded to Vieki. "Now that all our builders are out, we must go too," he said. As they made their way up the narrow stairs toward the ground level of the roofless hall, Vieki marveled at his master's balance. Neither of them had eaten at all, or slept for more than a few moments in days, and Yaurike was old enough to have been alive when the Hikadaya first took Nakiga Mountain for their own, but he climbed like a youth. Vieki could only hope to have half his master's vigor when he reached the same age, if he reached a greater age at all, which had seemed unlikely for some time now. Your idea was clever, Viekica, Yarike said from the near darkness above, his voice pitched low. I thought Sunoku would balk at it, but she is rare for her order and even more for her age. I admit she surprises me. I was impressed that she would abandon that cumbersome wagon and her ancestors' coffin. He laughed quietly. Even better, though, your idea amused me. Yarike rarely handed out praise. Even though they were now only a few paces away from angry mortals with arrows and axes, Vieki was full of pride. Thank you, High Magister. Still, he was puzzled, too. I only meant to frighten the Northmen. You say it amused you? It is one thing to win a battle that you should lose. It is another to pour salt in the wounds you inflict. It is a scant compensation for the Storm King's failure. But I wish I could have seen the mortals' faces as the sarcophagus came down on them. Do you think they thought it was General Ekisuno himself, come to burn them all? Vieki heard the soft rustle of the magister's garment suddenly cease. He reached out a hand to touch his master's elbow, letting him know he was behind him. The magister turned and took his hand. He made the finger sign silence against Vieki's palm, then the brushing symbol that meant wait. A moment later, Yarike said, They have gone out of the castle again. By the garden, those mortals are as noisy as cattle. How did they ever defeat us in the past? He led Vieki up the crumbling steps and into the night air, his tread slow and cautious. Should we not hurry, Magister? There will be no escape at all if we are caught. Save your haste until we need it. Yarike struck out toward the far side of the ruins, heading at an angle toward the hilltop that towered over the Tangleroot Castle ruins. Vieki could hear the shrieks of wounded mortals from the slopes below and was filled with contempt. Foul brutes. Could they not even bear their injuries with dignity? Do we know where to join Sunoku and the rest? He asked. Yarike did not turn around, already leaning into the rising slope. His voice fluttered back to Vieki, soft as a moth in flight. It will be easy enough, Host Foreman. Sunoku is her ancestor's heir. And more, we need only follow the trail of dead mortals. By Dror and Adon and all the rest, what is happening? His Grimner stamped toward the group of men standing around the wreckage of the fiery wagon that had killed more than a dozen of his soldiers in its downward progress, and had terrified at least 10 score more into running headlong into the blind night. He feared that many who had fled had already been killed by the Norns, but prayed that he would be able to find and bring back any survivors when the sun was up. The night had been a disaster, and now the Norns had escaped the ruins and were heading north again. Isgrimner sniffed the air and felt his stomach turn over at the tang of burned flesh. As he neared the gathering, he raised his voice again. I said, what is happening? Why are you men huddled here? Sludig, is that you? I see Brinder's horse. Where is he? I told him to follow those damned sneaking creatures. We must not let them get away. We must hound them through the wilderness until every last one of them is slaughtered. Jarl Vigri went after them with his bowmen, said Sludig from the darkness, but his voice sounded hoarse and strange. Brinder is... Isgrimner felt his heart and innards go cold. He hurried forward, ignoring the pain of several bleeding wounds. Oh, sweet Osiris! Is it Brinder? Is he... It was only as he reached the circle of men that Isgrimner could see faces. One was Sludig's long, mournful countenance, and the rest seemed to be Brinder's scoggy men. But the man who was kneeling next to the smoking wreckage of the cart and the huge upended coffin, Isgrimner was surprised and relieved to see, was Thane Brinder himself. A black, charred shape lay half in and half out of the scorched sarcophagus. Here and there a bit of pale flesh, a few grinning teeth, or a spot of unburnt bandage gleamed through the ash. Only a single arm protruding from the blackened, shriveled mass remained whole. Around its wrist was a thick gold bracelet. Brinder glanced up, his eyes red in the torchlight and his face suddenly looking decades older. It is his. Brinder lifted the arm so that the bracelet caught the light. He won it at Cracky's Field against the remnants of Scali's army just half a year ago. His Grimner must have looked like he still did not understand, because Brinder blinked and said, This is Floki, my son. They burned him alive and rolled him down the hill to frighten us, my children. Brinder shook his head slowly. God curse them. God curse them. When he spoke again, it was more quietly. Telling his mother, that will be the foulest part. There's nothing worse, said his Grimner, as I know myself. Sludig leaned over and touched the Duke's arm, reminding him that there was much to do. You stay here for now, Brinder, his Grimner said. Bury your son and the others. Break camp and follow us when you can. And so it goes on, said Brinder. His Grimner didn't like the sound of that and was almost glad he was leaving the Thane behind for now. Brinder was a good man, but perhaps this had been one blow too many. Still, his Grimner understood his pain. We will all remember your son, he said. May God take him swiftly to his bosom in heaven. Their tricks, the form of his death, they mean nothing. Just more cruelty and the cruel war these bastard fairies have forced on us. Floki was captured in battle and died a hero. It is as simple as that. If you say so, Your Grace. Brinder let go of his son's arm. His Grimner did not want to see the burned body any longer. It looked as though something ancient and inhuman was trying to will itself into human shape. It is the truth, Brinder. The Thane of Norskog's face was as still and empty as stagnant water, but his voice had something ragged in it that his Grimner had never heard. I don't doubt it. But are you not tired of seeing so many of our sons turned into heroes before their time, Miss Grimner? I would have rather seen him live and make sons of his own. The Duke had nothing left to say. He could not even let himself feel true sadness now, because he knew it would make him weak when he needed to be strong and move swiftly. He and Vigri had to catch the Norns in the open before they could find another bolt hole, or worse, slip back to the safety of their city under Stormspike Mountain. He let his hand fall on Brinder's shoulder, then nodded to Sludig to follow him as he left the Thane to grieve. And it's good timing, because that's the end of part 1. I don't know how many parts there are, like 3 or something. Probably, yeah, 3 parts. Unless there's a little code at the end. I can't remember. Like I keep telling you guys, I haven't read this stuff since I wrote it. I don't know anymore. It's all a mystery to me. As a matter of fact, I only think that I wrote it because the name on the books is the same as the name on my driver's license. That's my only, real area of certainty that I have, and it's not that common a name. Yes, there are a few other Tad Williamses out there, as my agent found out when he had a collection thing going on, Tad Williams News, and he discovered that there were a few others. One of them was apparently a criminal, because I got stopped in the airport a couple of times, and people go, "Have you ever lived in Utah?" No, been there a few times. Nice place. Got some friends there, but no, never lived there. Sure, I don't know what you want me to say. If I had and was on the run, I wouldn't want to admit it, but since I haven't, I'm not going to say so. Anyway, and then there's another Tad Williams who recently retired, who was a police officer, I think, in the Midwest somewhere. Sounded like a responsible citizen. No, so it wasn't all crooks, just me and the guy from Utah. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. I want to thank you. I will be continuing with part 2 tomorrow at 7 p.m. my time, Pacific Daylight Time. Pacific. That's important to remember. It's Pacific Daylight Time. It's not the Indian Ocean. It's not Lake Baikal. It's not Lake Titicaca. It's not Morro Bay or, well, Morro Bay is kind of part of the Pacific, I guess. Anyway, but it's Pacific Daylight Time. So be there or be square. Well, no, I don't want to wish squareness on anybody, but be nice if you're there. If not, as I've mentioned before, these readings are available on tadwilliams.com. I believe they're on YouTube as well, although I should really check that because I keep saying it, but I keep forgetting to look. And of course, these recordings are also on my social media, so you can find them there, Twitter or Facebook. As far as I know, my Facebook pages are all open to anybody who wants to read them or watch things on them. So even if you're not a friend, a Facebook friend, or a Twitter twin, F if I know, yeah, I think you can still watch them. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. Thank you so much for joining me. I always enjoy doing this. I don't know why. Because, otherwise I'd just be lying in bed talking to myself this time of the night or watching old Mystery Science theaters or something like that. So it's nice to have, a chance to actually communicate with real human beings. And so I appreciate that everybody is putting things in there so that I can see that there are actually people out there and I'm not just talking to myself. Anything else? No, just want to, again, wish you all the very best of health and happiness. Be kind to yourselves. Be kind to your family, loved ones, neighbors, fellow citizens, anybody you can be kind to, because everybody needs a little kindness in their lives, especially these days when things are a little difficult. So that's that. With that, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to say come back and see me again soon. And this is good night from the Casita Bill Williams in California del Norte.